All right, so we're continuing with our study in Paul's epistle to Titus, and we are in chapter 1. We're going to continue now through to the end of chapter 1, and well, I have subtitled this. We have subtitled this, and these are words that come. All of this comes spilling out of the first chapter. The mouths that must be stopped. Most that have commented on the epistles that Paul wrote to Timothy and Titus kind of take a very laissez-faire thought that this is all this is about is order in the church. But I think they miss the gravity. If one says this is just about gravity or order in the church, miss the seriousness of what was going on that Paul wanted addressed. And these words, like the mouths that must be stopped, these are Paul's penned words. They point to a situation where we have a theme, and we've said like the theme is the things that are wanting. That is that there were issues that Paul was instructing Titus needed to be addressed. And this is at a time when Paul also writes, and this also comes out of chapter 1, for there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers. That's a pretty serious charge. Many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers. And these words we'll see now in our study, the context in which Paul is writing about this. Now, we've talked about Titus. Titus was a Hebrew, and he was uncircumcised. So he was considered a Gentile, an uncircumcised Hebrew. But as a Hebrew, Paul could speak to him in a way that he would, of understanding of those things that are in fact very pertinent to the Hebrews, in fact, to the Jews. And that'll come out in this study as well. So what we're going to do is, for context's sake, Vivian is going to read and bring us up to where we left off, and we'll be putting in. So Vivian, if you'll read, starting. So we're in Titus chapter 1.
Make sure it's not coming up.
Yeah.
Titus chapter 1, starting at verse 5. For this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city, as I had appointed thee. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot, not accused. If any be blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. For a bishop must be blameless, as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate, holding fast the faithful words as he hath been taught, that he might be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. Verse 10. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true.
All right, so now we last study covered verses 5 through 9, and now we're picking up at verse 10, and this is where we read, and we're going to step through these words because the words are everything, and if I don't understand the words with clarity, I'm going to miss exactly the point that Paul is making in his writing to Titus. So Paul writes here in this verse 10, for there are many unruly, and that's what we say, there are many unruly, and one that is unruly is one that is ungovernable, one that is disorderly in tongue, heart, passions, etc. So that's unruly is just not somebody that can't sit still. This person is ungovernable. So Paul writes, there are many that are that way, and they are vain talkers. Now, say a vain talker is someone who has empty things to say. Their content is futile, worthless. And then Paul goes on to say that they are deceivers. So deceivers, that's pointing to deception. So there are unruly, empty talkers, vain talkers, and they're going about deceiving. Now note this, he says, specially. And that word specially means more than other persons, in a supreme degree, preeminently. So specially, they of the circumcision. Well, looky here, the circumcision have infiltrated amongst these Hebrews, these uncircumcised, these Gentiles. They have the circumcision in there, who are unruly, vain talkers, and deceivers. Now, mindful that it is unlawful for him that is a Jew to mix with a Gentile of the nations. So it would appear then to me quite clearly that these circumcision are in and amongst other Hebrews, trying to persuade them in their own direction. Matthew 23:15, Vivian.
Matthew 23:15. Woe unto you, scribes, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, ye make him twofold more a child of hell than yourselves.
So it would be the scribes and the Pharisees that are an example of the circumcision. The scribes and Pharisees, Sadducees, they were of the circumcision. And Paul, or actually Jesus now says in Matthew 23, he calls them hypocrites. Look what they were doing. They were out there looking for uncircumcised, principally Hebrews, and to proselytize them. And to proselytize them, then they would put them in bondage. And this comment is, ye make him twofold more a child of hell than yourselves, pointing to the bondage of the rigor that one that had become a proselyte would have to follow under the thumb of the scribes and Pharisees. Now I point out also something here, Galatians 2:7, Vivian.
Galatians 2:7. But contrariwise, when they saw that the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed unto me, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter.
Now I'm putting up this verse, Galatians 2:7, because there is a matter of the circumcision. But I also wanted to I thought I'd take occasion to point out there are many people, including those that see the scriptures dispensationally, perhaps from an Acts chapter 2 perspective, but principally very much of Christendom is of the understanding that there is only one gospel. And that comes out of wording that oftentimes is extracted from Galatians chapter 2, verses 7, 8, and 9. Now, it mentions the circumcision, and there is a gospel of the circumcision, and there is a gospel of the uncircumcision. Now, our King James Bible is the only Bible, the Word of God, I should say, that correctly is translated by the translators to say that there is a gospel of the uncircumcision. The perversions don't use the word of, they use the word to. And that simple two-letter change makes a world of difference. The word of and the word to, they're both prepositions. the preposition of indicates relationship. So when I say gospel of the uncircumcision, what I'm reading is that there is a gospel that is related to the uncircumcision. When we read gospel of the circumcision, that tells me, this is important instruction to me, that there is a gospel which is related to the circumcision. So that tells me there are two distinct gospels, one belonging to the circumcision, one belonging to the uncircumcision. Now, the one belonging to the uncircumcision is the gospel of grace. The gospel belonging to the circumcision is the gospel of the kingdom, that Jesus is the Christ. Follow him to the kingdom. Now, what the perversions have done is they do not use the preposition of, they use the preposition to. To is a preposition that indicates direction. So if I then read Galatians 2, 7, 8, 9, if I read them as the gospel to the uncircumcision and the gospel to the circumcision, what I'm reading now is that there's no difference between the gospels, and that rather it is just a matter of mission, that Paul had a mission to the uncircumcision, and that the Peter and the rest of the disciples had a mission to the circumcision. That then supports the idea or the notion that there's only one gospel. Paul took it to the uncircumcised, and Peter and the rest of the apostles took it to the circumcision. So there is a source of confusion when somebody reads a perversion of the Bible and we don't read the proper prepositions. Small words make a huge difference. So you can actually check that out. If you have an NIV or any other version of the Bible, you can see what has happened to Galatians chapter 2, verses 7, 8, and 9, and why folks will rigorously adhere to the notion that there's only one gospel. So this is the corruption that was coming towards the believers in Crete because of the circumcision. There's that word of, and Paul uses the word of.
Hey, Van?
Yes, Lord.
The word of, could you also say that it could mean doctrine?
The word, yeah.
The two gospels would be like two separate doctrines, right?
Yeah, they're two. Yeah, exactly. So they're two. There's a gospel of, there's a gospel of, which means related to the uncircumcision. There is a different, which is different from, doctrinally different from the gospel of the circumcision. And many people, in fact, I've had it said to me, no, there's just one gospel. It's just different words used to express the same thought. Well, that doesn't wash. Different words leads to different understandings. Okay, now Paul writes in verse 11, he says, whose mouths must be stopped. So Paul wants them, he wants them shut up. The circumcision. He wants the deceivers, he wants the deceivers to be shut up. Now, I'll point out that this could only be commanded by an apostle which had authority. We don't go around today with this kind of authority, but Paul had the authority, and he's telling Titus, these mouths must be stopped. Yet, there may have been those of the circumcision that did not accept Paul's apostolic authority. Now, this is an important little detail. In fact, it's more than a detail, that Paul was not necessarily accepted as an apostle by all of the Jews. I'll point out. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 1 and 2, he says, "Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord?" Those are important credentials, seeing the risen Christ. "Are not ye my work in the Lord? If I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless I am to you. For the seal of mine apostleship are ye in the Lord." So what Paul is doing now in his instruction to Timothy is while he cannot necessarily take authority over those circumcised, he can certainly stop them from the words that they're taking to the uncircumcised. And this is the instruction that Timothy is getting. Can't take authority over them, but he can certainly stop them from their polluted messages. And then Paul points out, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert. That word subvert means to undermine the faith of a person, to corrupt, to pervert. So Paul writes, who subvert whole houses. Now this would point to where the believers were gathering. They weren't gathering in nice white steepled churches. They were gathering in houses. There were houses of believer and fellowship. And these houses where these deceivers were coming in, this is where the subversion, this corruption was happening. And Paul wanted this talking, he wanted it stopped. He goes on to say, teaching things which they ought not. So there were many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, and they were teaching things which they ought not, and for an objective. Paul said to Timothy, Timothy 1:3, Vivian.
In 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3, Paul said, "As I besought thee to abide still at Ephesus, when I went into Macedonia, that thou mightest charge some that they teach no other doctrine."
So this is the point of what Paul wants. He wants their mouths stopped from teaching other doctrine. And this was other doctrine that was being brought in that was subverting the understanding of those there. And they were doing it for a reason, for filthy lucre's sake. So this is interesting in that the two-word phrase, filthy lucre, actually is a phrase that shows up in the Oxford English Dictionary. Filthy lucre is defined as dishonorable gain. And it's actually in the Tyndale Bible, the OED points out as an example of the use of the words filthy lucre. The Oxford English Dictionary quotes the Tyndale Bible, which is 1526, 1534. The OED teaches Titus 1:11. The words are a little bit different. Notice this: teaching things which they ought not because of filthy lucre. Now, the Tyndale Bible was, of course, earlier than the King James Bible. So the Bible that we have today was still going through purification. And that purification, we see there are some word changes that are happening. And the words because of filthy lucre, by the time we get to the King James Bible, it is for filthy lucre's sake. And that's a clarification for the reader today.
And you might tell them that Tyndale is spelled differently.
Yeah, you might see Tyndale spelled with a Y today, as opposed to the I. Now, of the circumcision, one of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said Cretians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. So this Cretan was likely a Hebrew and a Jew circumcised, living and attending a synagogue in Crete, and a prophet of the circumcision. But this fellow perhaps was a little bit more honest than the rest, and so he characterized these and said that they are always liars, evil beasts, and slow bellies. So we say, well, what is this? Now, what are we looking at? Always liars. So the word always, which has fallen from use today. Today, we don't use the word always. We use the word always with an S. But always is actually defined as all the time, perpetually. Whereas always, with an S, ALWAYS, is understood as being at every time, or on, that is at a certain occasions. Now, the Cretans were always liars, which is to say that they were perpetually lying. Every time they opened their mouth, it was always a lie that was being spoken. Somebody that is always a liar may be lying on a particular topic from time to time. But these, according to this prophet, says they perpetually lie. Everything they have to say is a lie. He goes on to say, this is the witness of the prophet. He says they're evil beasts. An evil beast being a brutal, savage man, doing or tending to do harm. Slow bellies. Now, this is another two-word phrase that shows up in the OED and defined as a lazy, idle person. So we have now characterized the Cretans as being perpetual liars, like always liars, evil beasts, that is those that are tending to do harm, and they're lazy and idle. And then Paul says, this witness is true, which is to say that Paul says, I believe it. All right, we'll push on and go now from verse 13 to verse 16.
Titus chapter 1, picking up on the last part of verse 13, part B. Wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. But even their mind and conscience is defiled. They profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate.
Okay. There are a lot of words in there that we don't use every day, so we will take time to make sure we understand exactly what's being said, because this is quite significant. This first chapter is really now all the instruction of the condition, the situation in Crete that Paul has observed, and his instructions to Titus. So he says then in 13b, wherefore rebuke them sharply. So I say, well, what is the word rebuke? What does that really mean? It means to reprimand for a fault. That is to, and actually there's the sense of shaming them. They should be shamed in their reprimand because what they're doing is faulty. And Paul says that rebuke should be sharp. So this is very specific instruction to Titus, who was leading the call to be saints, soldiers under command in Crete. Now, I point out, this is not for today, because today, all in the body of Christ are equal. It's not the situation back at the beginning with Paul and Titus fellow soldiers. This was a time when Paul, with authority to Titus, under his direct instruction and command, could be instructed to do something such as to rebuke somebody, to shame them for what they're saying, that they should be sound in the faith. So if somebody tries to do that to a believer today in the body of Christ, that individual is wrong. There's no room for somebody within the body of Christ to rebuke another individual, because we all have difficulties in understanding. It is not given that we should go around rebuking one another. Then Paul goes on to write in verse 14, not giving heed to Jewish fables. Well, this is interesting, because who would know Jewish fables? To me, this is further evidence that these in Crete were Hebrews. Who else would be knowing of Jewish fables? I don't know any Jewish fables, and I'm not sure that I'd even be interested in a Jewish fable. However, if I was a Hebrew, I might be interested in knowing some fables about the Jews and being entertained by it. But no, so this is Jewish fables. Paul saying that gives us evidence of who the audience was. And these Jewish fables and commandments of men are that turn from the truth. Yes, Brother Dwayne.
Yeah, so these Christians who are always liars and evil beasts, are these Christians Hebrews?
Yes, they're Hebrews.
Hebrew.
They're the circumcision.
The circumcised.
Yeah,
they're circumcised. Okay.
There are circumcised Hebrews on Crete, and there are uncircumcised Hebrews on Crete. And what was going on here is that the circumcised Hebrews, those of the circumcision, were going into the fellowship of the other Hebrews, uncircumcised, and using the messages that they wanted to actually pervert their thinking, subvert them, to try and draw them in their direction. Bad stuff, very bad stuff. Paul wanted it stopped. And further, so this is, so they're turning from the truth. Now notice this, that Paul doesn't want them turned from the truth. These circumcised were coming in with Jewish fables and turning them from the truth. We note again Paul's instruction to Timothy.
So back in 1 Timothy chapter 1, starting at verse 3, Paul said, as I besought thee to abide still at Ephesus when I went into Macedonia, that thou mightest charge some that they teach no other doctrine, neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questions rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. So do.
So what I'm going to point out here is, now look at this, the use of the word fables. When Paul speaks to Timothy, he says, neither give heed to fables. Well, what kind of fables? On Paul's mind, there's only one. He's pointing to a particular type of fables. They are the Jewish fables. This is what's going on. That's because this is a groups and audiences of Hebrews, and they are susceptible to fables of Judaism. Paul says that he doesn't want them to be turned from the truth. And these fables are tempting them away from the truth.
Are you going to give us some examples of those?
I don't know the fables.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know what they are.
Who knows some Jewish fables?
I do.
Okay, go ahead. Go for it.
I don't want to take over the whole, but basically what Jewish fables were ways to so if there was something like a Jew would read in scripture and they didn't understand it, the rabbis would
Interpret.
interpret it by creating a story, like an extra biblical story
Yeah.
around it. So for example, what one example is that why did God call Abraham and not somebody else out of Ur of the Chaldees? And one rabbi, I read it, and it was a fable about how Abraham was making idols in his father's shop because that was his father's trade. And this whole story around that, and then how God spoke to him and all that. And then another fable, another Jewish fable is there was that one, and then there was another one about why did God give the Torah to the Israelites and not another nation? And there was like some rabbi came up with a story of how God went to all the different nations of the world. Do you want my Torah? Do you want my Torah? Right. And so they were meant to fill in knowledge gaps.
Yeah.
They were adding to the word of God.
Yeah.
Yes.
And actually, I just had one thought into my mind as well, and it's significant because a lot of Christians jumped on this when it came out. It was called the circle prayer.
Oh,
Anybody
yes.
ever heard of that?
Yeah, I heard of circle
And that's
prayer.
based on an old Jewish fable about some Jew who was praying for rain, and he said it to God, I demand rain. I'm going to make a circle, and I'm not moving out of the circle until rain comes. And apparently God answered this prayer because of his strong faith. And so, of course, now this was a few years ago, but you had a lot of Christians now drawing circles and praying in circles on the ground,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is a very,
God works in circles.
it's from witchcraft. It's a Wiccan,
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
yes,
I was
yes.
going to say, there's evidence of that in witchcraft as well.
but that's a Jewish fable right there.
Yeah.
John Walton said this, that's it.
It's like meditative prayer.
Yeah, there's a
A tradition that's been coming around for the last 15 or 20 years about meditative prayer. I can't remember what they
Yeah.
call it.
Contemplative prayer.
Contemplative prayer. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just thinking for, like how nowadays so much preaching is story. They have to always have a story about it. I heard on the Christian radio, one of the big famous preachers, talking about the rapture, and they had a whole drama. It was like you were watching a soap opera.
Yes.
And I find everybody is sort of making up stories. And what really bothers me is when they attribute certain characteristics to like the apostle or one of, oh, this person was stubborn, or this person was like this and that. I think there's no way that. You're making that up
For the story.
and it just muddies the waters so much. So when I see this, it turned from the truth. I thought, yeah, that's what happens. You muddy the water, you appeal to people's, well, I don't know anything, so this sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Be turned from the truth. Why God's word is so clear, if you can, just take it for what it is.
Yeah, and to your point, Karen, it's easier to listen to a story, much easier to listen to a story than it is to go through scripture word by word, studying the details
Like we do.
like we do. I mean, this is not entertaining. This is work.
And most people, they say, well, I know the Bible, I've read the Bible, but what they really are is they're familiar with snippets of scripture, even if it's from a coloring book or a child's book. That's why I don't like these illustrations of Noah's Ark and stuff from like little coloring books, because it imprints in your mind. you know?
Yeah,
And that's why I always like using the word a biblical account, because I want to put it back to this is real history. This is real people. And as we're doing this study, I'm enjoying so much just seeing the actual words and who it's actually to, because most Christians, they're just quick to like read a passage in Titus and look for the application to say, this is about, I should behave in this or that way.
yeah.
When if people looked at it from a history point of view, say, these are real people, this is a real situation, and you know, it just changes everything.
Okay, so we'll move forward. Thank you, Karen.
That's great
Excellent
points.
points you've made. Excellent points. Paul goes on to say in verse 15, unto the pure, all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. Now notice 1 Timothy 5:22.
1 Timothy 5:22. Lay hands suddenly on no man, neither be partaker of other men's sins. Keep thyself pure.
But Paul says, unto the pure, all things are pure. Keep thyself pure. Don't involve yourself with other men's sins. And all things are pure. Now, this is an important, and it can easily slip by us as to what Paul is saying here. But he says in Romans 14, 19, 20.
Romans 14, starting at verse 9. Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace, and things wherewith we may edify, wherewith one may edify another. For meat destroy not the work of God. All things indeed are pure, but it is evil for that man who eateth with offense.
So what I want to point out here is that Paul writes, all things indeed are pure. But then there are situations where something can be offensive, but Paul says that things are in fact pure. Now there's a point coming up about the defiled and the unbelieving. Now I'm going to deal, before I deal with the word defiled, first let me deal with the word unbelieving, because when I read that, I'm susceptible that the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, not believing the gospel of salvation. Well, actually, no, this unbelieving is pointing to the truth. So there are those that are unbelieving of the truth. They may believe that salvation is in God, but they're unbelieving of the truth. And in fact, we're surrounded by that today. There are many that just don't believe the truth has been revealed to Paul. The context here then for this matter of, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving, the context is that turn from the truth. So turning from the truth, the result of that is such that one can end up believing many, many things that are not true if I step away from the truth. Then Paul uses this word defiled, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving, that is not believing the truth, is nothing pure, but even their mind and conscience is defiled. Now, Vivian and I were chatting, and I was saying, I don't think that I've taken time to define the word or look up the word defiled. And so I should perhaps put a definition to it. And so I decided I better take the OED and look up the word defiled and get a definition to it. And it turned out to be a lot more work than I expected. In fact, this is what you're going to see now in the next couple of minutes. It took me something in excess of 2 hours to study and put together. But I say that this is sometimes getting one's head wrapped around these words can be a lot of work. But let me spill it out to you. And this is a little bit of detail. I know some of you sometimes may wish I just sort of spit it out rather than going through the detail. But I know Carlos will probably enjoy this. So I'll go through this now. Defile in the OED actually has a number of different senses in which it is used. And interesting that the Oxford English Dictionary also mentions a lot of scripture where the word defiled is used. So defile. So there is defile, which is to render, that is materially foul, filthy, or dirty. And then the OED gives the 1535 Coverdale Bible, Job 9:31, as an example of the use of the word defile when it is in the sense of rendering foul, filthy, and dirty. Now, what I have here is the words as they appear in the Coverdale Bible, Job 9:31. Notice how the English is very different, the spelling, where we read, yet shouldest thou dip, D-Y-P-P-E, dip me in ye mire, M-Y-R-E. That mire would be like mud, guck. And mine, we spell that today, M-I-N-E, mine own, M-Y-N-E is in the Coverdale, mine own clothes should defile me. So interesting now, when you compare this to the way Job 9:31 appears in the King James Bible, how the words have been spelt differently and communicated to us differently. So that's an example then of defile, to render foul, filthy, dirty.
By putting them in the mire, which is the mud.
Which is mud. So that's a kind of like a muddy, dirty, muddy defilement. Then there is defile, which is to violate the chastity or to deflower. The King James 11 Bible is an example given by the OED, Genesis 34:2. And they just quote, the OED just quotes a portion of the verse saying, Shechem, son of Hamor, took her and lay with her and defiled her. So the OED is telling me that this sense of defilement is the act of, or is a sense of loss of chastity. Then
Third meaning.
the third is to violate the sacredness or sanctity, that is to desecrate. This is so a further sense of the word defile. And as an example, the OED gives Coverdale, 2 Chronicles 36:14. They defile, notice the spelling, D-Y-F-Y-L-E-D, they defiled the house of the Lord, spelled with an E. The OED also gives the 1611 King James Bible, and spelling and words in the 1611 version, or actually Bible, is somewhat is different from the current King James Bible, which has
Up-to-date spelling.
Up-to-date spelling the way we spell things today. So in Nehemiah 13:29, this is now regarding violation of sanctity. They have defiled the priesthood. So that's the violation of sacredness. Couple of examples. And then there is the sense to render ceremonially unclean. So now, why are we going through this? Because I was trying to understand what is the sense that a mind and conscience is defiled. What is this defilement? And so I needed to try and understand in what sense. So to render ceremonially unclean, I go, oh, There's Coverdale, Leviticus 11:44. Ye shall not defile yourselves in any manner of creeping beast. Notice the spelling is all very different. So that is a ceremonially unclean.
By not eating that. kind
By
of-
not eating
eating
those
eating
things. Don't
things.
eat those things. Leviticus 22:8 in the King James Bible, 1611 edition. That which dieth of itself, he, spelled H-E-E, shall not eat to defile himself therewith. So here was another dietary law to avoid becoming ceremonially unclean, that is to not eat something that has died spontaneously. And then the final entry of the OED on rendering ceremonially unclean is John 18:28. They themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled. And that defilement would be a ceremonial unclean. Okay, so I'm studying these things and I'm trying to get my head around exactly what it is that I'm reading about this mind and conscious defilement. And then I come to another understanding, which is to render morally foul or polluted. To render morally foul or polluted. Then I see there's a note under this entry that says circa 1325, C, defiled, spelled E-D, D-E-F-I-L-E-D. I go, oh, I've been checking out the wrong word. I better go check out D-E-F-I-L-E-D because that's what's in verse Titus 1:15. But morally or foul polluted, Tyndale, Mark 7:15, those things which proceed out of him are those things which defile the man. So there's the example of the sense of use of rendering morally or foul polluted. So then I go and I check out the word defiled, spelled with an ED, and there's a single entry. Defiled with an ED is polluted, sullied. So you say, well, what is sullied? Sullied is soiled. That is to be, it's in essence, it is to be made filthy, soiled, dirty. And I go, wow, that's interesting. Their mind and conscience is polluted. It is sullied. And suddenly what pops into view for me is thus the expression, a dirty mind. Ever hear somebody has a dirty mind, or ever hear the expression, get one's mind out of the gutter? Well, it's actually scriptural, where Paul has written, even their mind and conscience is defiled. That is, they have dirty minds. That's what Paul is dealing with in his writing to Titus. These that Paul is instructing Titus concerning are those that have defiled minds. Their mind and conscience is in the gutter.
Always,
Always in the gutter.
perpetually.
So Paul then says, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. In other words, everything they see is filthy. They think everything, but Paul had said everything, in fact, their things are pure, but they see things as being filthy. And so there is some doctrinal error that results as this. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3:17, if you want to read this.
Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are.
So this now I'm beginning to understand that any man defile the temple of God. So what's being defiled now is the mind and conscience is being defiled, and God does not want that to happen. So how mind and conscience, how is it being defiled? Well, it has to do with these things that are being said. Them that are defiled, everything is a problem. 1 Corinthians 8:7.
1 Corinthians 8:7. Howbeit, there is not in every man that knowledge. For some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled.
Okay, so this is now instruction that Paul is giving to be careful of those whose minds are weak, because they're going to end up thinking things that are clean are actually in fact defiled, and then they end up with a conscience problem. And that conscience problem happens from knowledge. So having both mind and conscience defiled is very damaging, because the conscience is that which bears witness to that which is right and wrong. It was the conscience that came to Adam, where he could now tell right and wrong, not because he had laws, but because his mind could tell him. But if one's mind is defiled, then one loses the ability to tell right from wrong. So then, if nothing is pure, then nothing we do matters.
That would be their thinking.
That would be their thinking. The thinking is, if nothing is pure, then it doesn't matter if we sin. A good conscience, or a conscience defiled, no longer detects right from wrong, good from bad. So then Paul writes to Timothy,
1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. But we know that the law is good if a man use it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man.
so now the law is important for a very specific reason, and not for a righteous man, but because a righteous man knows right from wrong. But
For the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, for liars, for perjured persons, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was committed to my trust.
now this is instruction from Paul, and he's talking about contrary to sound doctrine. If one's mind is defiled, then they don't have, their ability to understand right from wrong is now compromised, and they can't tell.
Can I just add something?
Yes.
Can I just break in?
Yes,
Just
go ahead.
going back to where you were talking about in verse 15, their mind and conscience being defiled. I find it interesting that the Hebrew word there for conscious or consciousness,
Yes.
when you look a little deeper and you find the root of that word,
Yes.
the meaning of that means to see completely.
Aha.
So it's
Okay.
interesting that in Genesis, right? God
Yeah.
said that their eyes were opened
Yes.
Yes.
when
Right.
they sinned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And Paul was to open the eyes of the blind. Paul
Yeah.
was sent
Yeah.
to open their eyes.
Yeah. So
I
now
just thought
there are those, now they're saved, but they're doing things which are contrary to sound doctrine, and they are actually having to depend on the law to help them tell between that which is right and wrong. And this is very strange stuff, but this is a situation for those that have this is a situation in Crete where their mind and conscience was defiled. They're having difficulty telling what is right and wrong, to the extent that they defile themselves with mankind. Now, this word in the Greek, I discovered is a single word that in the English is translated a phrase, for them that defile themselves with mankind. And that is actually pointing to sodomy. So this is what's happened to those that have their minds and conscience defiled. They don't see clearly. They can't tell what's right and wrong, even though they're saved, because they're doing things which are contrary to sound doctrine. So to them that are defiled and unbelieving of sound doctrine is nothing pure. So then some taught that sin did not matter because there was nothing pure. You see these words? They think there is nothing pure. So then we see then in Paul wrote in Romans 6, 1 and 2.
Romans 6, 1 and 2. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein?
Now you see where this led to was this thinking that if nothing is pure, then nothing we do really matters. So then it doesn't matter how we live. Let's just live how we want to live, including in defilement. And we don't have to worry because grace will abound. And Paul says, God forbid, don't do that. Because he says, how shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? This is why it's so important that Paul wanted there to be no other doctrine taught other than sound doctrine that came through what he had been revealed to him.
Hey, Van?
Yes.
One thought on God forbid.
Yeah.
I heard this from another teacher, but it was that the idea is that God forbid is preclusive. Like he's already forbid it in eternity
Yes.
past.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, God forbid,
Yeah.
past tense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
See. Thanks, David. Paul says,
So what is he
vows-
trying to say by when he says unto the pure, all things are pure?
Yes.
Could we get some expansion on that?
Yeah, so unto the pure, that is those that have a working mind and conscience.
They know right from
They
wrong.
know right from wrong. So today I know I can tell the difference between right and wrong. We can tell the difference between right and wrong. And so we police ourselves to live in a way that we think is better. And in fact, Paul says, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 6, where he says, give no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed. So Paul wants us to live in a wise way, avoiding sinful behavior. Because if we live in a sinful way, the ministry ends up being mocked. The ministry will take a hit.
So what are these all things? I mean, all things can't mean all things.
Well,
It's not all things are pure.
Yeah, so all things, yeah, good question. All things are pure. In other words, those things which are declared ceremonially unclean is the focus here, because this is a Hebrew thing. So he's not saying that, you can pick up
Fornication.
that fornication.
They had ordinances.
There
against
were things that they should not do, but in and of themselves, they were pure, but they were with a
Okay, so So the all things is constrained. It's like a list of things that are constrained by the old Levitical list,
Order.
let's say,
Yes.
of what
Yes.
things are pure.
So,
Because it's in context, a reference to that. Correct?
that's the way I take it. It is.
Okay, I see that. Okay. I see
And
that.
for these Hebrews, this is
Right,
less,
yes.
less meaningful to us because we don't think in terms of things being pure and impure as the
Got it.
Hebrews did.
Okay.
So I see Dwayne and David. So Dwayne.
We're-
You have to unmute.
Yeah, I'm glad you went this long way around, man. I'm glad you came this way because you really got me to thinking. It looks to me like what Paul is saying, unto the pure in mind and conscience are all things pure. I think Paul is contrasting the believer and the unbeliever here to Titus. Kind of like what he did with Timothy. When you pull that verse up in Timothy 1, 1 Timothy 5:22, lay hands suddenly on no man,
Yes. Yeah.
And keep thyself pure.
Yeah.
Paul was admonishing Timothy, Paul is admonishing Timothy, he's admonishing Titus. Everybody here is not saved. This is my take now. I don't know if anybody agrees with it.
Yeah. So what I'm taking from this, Brother Dwayne, is that there was a common acceptance of Jesus, of God, but where there was the division was in doctrine. And this word unbelieving, you see here, them that are defiled and unbelieving. So what I see here is the unbelieving had to do with, there was doctrinal corruption. They believed God, but their doctrines were so damaged and corrupted, their minds end up being defiled. They otherwise wouldn't be together instructing one another if they were completely unbelieving of God. So if they didn't accept God whatsoever for salvation, there would be no fellowship. But the rub here is on doctrines. Yes, Brother Talker.
I remember one time asking about this passage many years ago, and one of the ways a believer explained to me is a little different from what we're talking about today, but I agree with what you guys are saying. But it just made me think of like a practical, and that is it. Like say if you see like a wallet lying on the ground, right?
Yeah.
You take that, you look for the person's address, and you phone the person, and you give them back their wallet with the cash and the credit cards and all that in it, right?
Yeah.
But if somebody is a thief, he sees that, he takes the cash out of it, he does that. So to the pure, somebody's mind and conscience, all things are pure. A wallet lying on the ground, it's pure, right?
Yeah.
But to the defiled and unbelieving, it's impure. It's something for evil purposes.
Yes.
Or they might even think that, oh, God left this for me because he knew I needed some money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. They could justify it.
Yeah.
To your point.
Yeah, their minds were corrupted.
Their mind, so their thinking is really it's damaged. They cannot tell right from wrong. So on your example of the wallet, to them, taking the money out before returning the wallet would be an okay thing to do. Yeah. Yes, Phil.
Hold on. Give me a minute, Phil. Give me 1 second. What makes the difference between a person knowing right from wrong and the person who doesn't know right from wrong? What makes the difference? Christ makes the difference. Christ makes the difference, not doctrine. It's Christ in the heart of the person. Would you agree with that, Fan?
Well,
It's Christ that makes, like Vivian just said, to the unpure person, he would think, oh, God, I know I needed some money, so this must be for me. But that's not a clean mind that thinks that way.
okay, yes.
Right.
So,
that's a whole,
Right? So
Yes,
what
yes,
makes
yes,
the
no.
difference?
yeah,
What makes the difference is Christ in the heart.
okay, you're
that's
raising a
interesting.
very good point. Now, let me contrast that with, let's say you do believe Christ and you are a believer in the finished work of Christ. You are in a fellowship, though, where somebody comes in and makes an argument or starts teaching certain things, and very persuasively, and let's use Brother Tucker's example, that God has a way of taking care of them that are his. And so if you find a wallet with some cash in it, that was just God ministering to you to give you some money that you needed. And if you hear these lies, because remember, these Cretans were perpetual liars.
And slow bellies.
And they are lying all the time. If you and I are in an audience and we're hearing this from a leader time after time after time, I could end up saying, well, they should know. I mean, after all, they went to seminary, they know Greek and Hebrew, so I guess that's right. What's happened to my mind?
It's defiled.
Yeah,
Yes.
I ended up being defiled, even though I'm a believer. So there are many believers in the world today who have gotten bad doctrine, even though they have Christ. They're a new creature created in him, but their mind and conscience has been polluted.
You got me there, Dave.
You
You brought it back to the context, and I had left
Well,
the context.
yeah.
You're right.
And I think one has to consider that even unbelievers have a conscience. There are many, a lot of them know right from wrong.
Yes, that's right.
To a
Yes.
certain degree, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That can't be denied.
Yeah. So I go to Phil and I go to Brother Ray.
Okay. Well, I love the conversation, Dwayne. Thanks for interrupting, because I think it carried it to where I was thinking. Unto the pure, all things are pure. Brother Van, you've referenced it back to the truth, right? True doctrine, Paul's doctrine, right? So there's a lot of defilement in Christianity, Dave. If we're just talking among Christianity, not among all humanity, right?
Right.
There's
Yeah.
bad doctrine, like
Yeah.
you say, that wallet that was found, I just needed that much money to go to Africa for my mission. Isn't God good providing? Or, all those kind of things. It's just how you think. And I love the way, Ken, the way you brought consciousness to conscience, because I get those two words mixed up in my mouth. But, your conscience is sees that, light is that light. And it's what's your consciousness, what you believe in your mind. If you believe God's providing, he's going to answer your prayer because you fasted for 2 days, you're going to interpret and see things the way you think. And that's why the way we think should be guided by, good doctrine, sound doctrine. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
That's where it's pure.
Yes.
In this, if you just say, well, let the laws of this land guide me. Oh, this is now legal. Well, I guess it's okay. It's not a sin anymore. That's just bad thinking.
Yeah. Right.
What we're seeing in society, it's tolerated now.
Yes.
And church people, sort of give an amen to stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
Yeah,
do. I
absolutely.
know it.
yeah.
Bad doctrine. Anyway, I'll just leave it.
Bad
Bad doctrine.
doctrine.
We're surrounded by oceans of bad doctrine.
Even from people that are claiming the name of Christ.
Right, yeah, believers. Yeah,
Right.
brother Ray.
Oh.
Oops,
Yeah,
sorry.
just a weather update. The thunder sounds like cannons out there. So just in case she disappears, just a disconnection. So
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
all right,
Okay.
okay.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Did Phil have another
Is-
comment?
We can carry on the second hour, Phil. I mean,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
carry, there'll be some discussion. Any other comments before I continue on? We've actually reached the top of the hour, and I should be wrapping up at this point.
You want to finish something though?
Well, I thought I was going to finish chapter 1, but I still have a number of slides to go yet. Let me just continue on with this. Paul is saying that these mouths must be stopped. So he wanted this bad doctrinal teaching to these members of the body of Christ, coming from those that were actually coming in with lies. He wanted that stopped. So Titus 1:16, they profess they know God, but in works they deny him. So it is the Cretans that profess the circumcised, they know God, but in works they deny him. And what we read is that the Cretans are always, that is perpetually, they're liars and they're evil beasts and slow bellies. So I think we'll stop here. We are just about finished with this chapter, but we've gone a little bit long, and we'll finish up this chapter when we get into starting chapter 2 at our next study.